the problem is, and I think the reason why we're here tonight, and I'm here speaking to you tonight, is that in some respects, obviously there are differences we can talk about, but in some respects, what we've just seen is a potential warning, a potential vision of a future that we could be facing. Not exactly the same, but I can sort of go into that. Because as we speak, the British government is in the process of introducing, or attempting to introduce, its own anti-boycott law. It's actually called, to give it its proper title, the Economic Activity of Public Bodies, brackets, Overseas Matters Bill. And just like its sort of prototypes in the United States, it's a major attack on freedom of expression, on local democracy, and on potentially on a wide range of campaigns for social and climate justice. What the anti-boycott bill in this country seems to do is different to what we've just been looking at in some respects. What it seeks to do is to prevent public authorities, which are very broadly defined to include local councils, universities, public sector pension funds and other public authorities, from basically making ethical choices about spending or investment. It would potentially prevent them from cutting ties with companies that are engaged in human rights abuses or environmental destruction in countries around the world. So it's a deeply concerning piece of legislation. Obviously, what it seeks to do is to clamp down on those bodies engaging in boycott and divestment campaigns. Now, as we've seen in the film, boycotts have long been central of a whole range of campaigns for human rights, for equality, for justice. We saw the examples in terms of the civil rights movement in the United States. I've sort of tried to kind of look into it. In fact, the actual, I'm pleased to say that the actual name boycott, some of you may know, comes from Captain Boycott, who was a landlord in Ireland in the 19th century, who was boycotted for attempting to, or he was ostracized, I suppose, because it wasn't called boycott until then, for attempting to evict his tenants. But actually the tactic itself is much older, going back at least to the 18th century, the Quit Sugar movement in this country, led mostly by women who refused to buy sugar that was purchased on plantations using enslaved labour, and therefore helped to change public opinion and contribute towards the ending of the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, the most famous boycott, we saw it in the film, the most famous boycott of them all, the campaign to end apartheid in South Africa. And of course, millions of people in this country and hundreds of local authorities and universities were part of that campaign. In fact, when Nelson Mandela came to Britain after he was released in 1998, after he had apartheid had ended and he'd gone on to lead South Africa, he said explicitly, he talked about his time when he was in prison, and he said, when we heard that the local authorities were boycotting apartheid products and that the universities had cut their links, that was a great inspiration to us in our struggle. And it's exactly that kind of solidarity that the British government is now seeking to prohibit with its anti-boycott bill. Just to give you a bit more of a flavour of the sort of contents of the bill, it's on the one hand a very broad piece of legislation. It has the potential to impact on campaigns, as I say, against deforestation, against the exploitation of children and workers in countries where those practices are tolerated by the authorities. On the other hand, both in terms of the rhetoric that the government's using and in certain aspects of the bill itself, it is directly aimed at campaigns in support of Palestinian rights. So in the actual face of the bill, they've written into the legislation that it's going to be this sweeping ban, but the government might grant exceptions in some circumstances. So, to give you an example, they've said in advance, we're going to grant an exception in the case of Russia, so in relation to the war in Ukraine. So if you want to boycott Russia, you'll be allowed to do so. But and we may consider other countries in the future. The Secretary of State will decide whether or not you can boycott this or that country. They've written into the legislation that no Secretary of State can ever grant such an exception in the case of Israel, not just Israel in terms of its internationally recognised borders, but the occupied Palestinian territory and the occupied Golan Heights. So even though the British government itself regards the settlements as illegal, it is seeking to write into British law statutory protection for those settlements from public sector boycotts. In the face of its own foreign policy, it is seeking to pass a law that says that Israel and the settlements must be treated in the same way, and indeed in contravention of its international commitments and UN resolutions on that issue. Just to give you one more example of this sort of repressive nature of this legislation, which of course is part of a wider suite of attacks on the right to strike, the right to protest, and other civil liberties. The bill contains a gagging clause which says that all those who are covered by the bill are forbidden from even making statements in support of a public sector boycott. So if you were a council leader, for example, the leader of the local council, and you wanted to, you were at a hustings event, say, in the run-up to an election, someone asked you, would you support a boycott or divestment of council funds from a company that's engaged in Israeli violations of Palestinian human rights, has been shown to be involved in violation of human rights? It would be illegal for you to answer by saying, well, I would support such a policy, but unfortunately it's not allowed under the existing law. You wouldn't even be able to explain your position. So the very speech of support for a boycott they're seeking to sort of prohibit. Ultimately, potentially leading to fines, potentially unlimited, at a level to be determined by the Secretary of State, which will be imposed, can be imposed both on the authority but also on the individual itself. And the aim, of course, is to make an enormous chilling effect that people will be frightened to even talk about issues of Palestinian rights, and of course another wide range of issues and campaigns as well. So it's a major threat. It's currently in Parliament. I suppose, fortunately, there is the good side, the optimistic bit is that almost kind of surprisingly, there's a major fight underway in relation to this bill. The bill was introduced in June. It had its first parliamentary debate, the second reading they call it, even though it's the first debate in Parliament, and it faced fierce opposition from all sides of the House of Commons. What actually happened, I'll say in a minute what happened in terms of the vote, which is a bit complicated, but there was, Conservative, Labour, all party MPs were all sort of heavily critical of the bill. Conservative MPs critical of the fact that the rewriting of foreign policy by the back door, for example, and things like whether or not you support boycott, a bit like the Arkansas Times I forget its name now in the film. You may not support this, but it should be up to local people to decide how their local council spends its sort of money. Since then, there's been a sort of growing opposition. Both the governments of Scotland and Wales have now formally stated their opposition to the bill. The Trade Union Congress, at its recent Congress meeting, voted unanimously in opposition to this bill. Just last week on Thursday, no pressure on any local authorities here, but Islington became the first local authority in England to come out against the bill, and we're hoping that's going to start to pick up in terms of local authorities taking a position of opposition to it. So there's a growing movement, and there is a Tory rebellion, as I say, that is underway. So I think there is a real opportunity to defeat this bill. So what we're seeking to do is to bring maximum pressure on MPs. I think the difficulty is, unfortunately, the government. You can't go back to 2019 and change the outcome of the general election. The government has got a large majority in Parliament. But what's surprising, 80 Conservative MPs, when it was voted on its second reading, neither voted for nor against the bill, which would be, which is bigger than the government's majority, astonishingly. If we can bring that pressure to bear, and as we approach a general election, I think there's a real sort of fight underway to try and prevent this bill from becoming law, and obviously to maintain that pressure if it does make it into the sort of House of Lords. So that's the situation here. It's different in many ways, but there are real echoes of what we've just been looking at in terms of in terms of the film, the potential impact on a sort of wide range of campaigns, and I hope people can get involved in supporting that. We've got to, as I say, keep the pressure on MPs. Tomorrow, if people are interested, BSC is organising an online rally, so you can tune into that, hear more from some of the MPs who are opposed to the bill, as well as, and I forgot, I should have said, in addition to the other bits of opposition, there's basically a huge coalition of civil society organisations that have come together in opposition to this bill. So over 70 civil society organisations have signed up to support the Right to Boycott campaign. It's not just the Palestine Solidarity campaign, it's the major environmental campaigns, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, trade unions representing millions of workers, major national trade unions are supporting it, faith groups, Muslim, Christian, Jewish organisations in opposition to this bill. So there's huge swathes of civil society are opposing this bill. Anyway, and there's going to be a rally tomorrow and a day of action. I'll let Brendan Harrow say about the actions that are going to be happening on Saturday, but just into the autumn there's going to be an ongoing campaign around this issue to keep the pressure on MPs, hopefully to persuade the government that it's not, as it approaches a general election, it's got other people to be mean to. I don't know, whatever they might decide, but this isn't their number one priority that they want to spend their political capital on as they head into a general election, and hopefully we can prevent the bill from becoming law.